Hi everyone, my name is Lacey. I'm an advocate here at the Avalon Center. As I mentioned before in my last video, I am the Sexual Assault Response Team Coordinator, and always and most importantly, I'm a sexual assault victim advocate. Last time I talked to you about becoming intimate after sexual assault and what that looks like and some tips or things that you could potentially try. And today I want to talk a little bit about flashbacks versus memories. That tends to be a common thing that people talk about, that we hear people say, I've had flashbacks, I've had memories, I've had nightmares. But sometimes what they mean can kind of be misconstrued, and so I want to help better explain so that way any of you that might be experiencing these things knows exactly kind of what's happening and can use the right verbiage and terminology. So the difference between a flashback and an intrusive memory are fairly simple. A flashback is actually reliving what had happened. And so that's where you lose track or lose your conscious self, and you were back there in that moment when that thing happened. And so it's to think of a term to better help, but you're being pulled back into that moment, or pulled back into that traumatic event. And so with a memory, you know where you are, but the memory keeps intruding in your mind. So that kind of right there, that being said, kind of helps to understand the difference. With the flashback, you're actually there in the moment. And so if we continue on with the intimacy section, if you're becoming intimate with a partner, and in the past you said I had a flashback, now you understand that with a flashback, you would be back there in that moment with your assailant, whereas the memory, it could have been the sheets that reminded you of the moment, and you're kind of remembering what happened rather than taking you back to when you're there. When trauma happens, the way our mind remembers the event is altered. The memory disturbances can create vivid involuntary moments that cause it to come into your conscious self, causing you to go back, and so it causes you to re-experience that event. That's a flashback, and remembering that there is a difference. And so our minds, they remember two different things for the most part: non-traumatic memories and traumatic memories. And with a non-traumatic memory, our brains can write that entire moment, everything that happened, every nice moment, every normal thing, and you can relive that and talk about that, remembering that in detail. But with traumatic memories, it's a bunch of scribbles because our brain is responding to that trauma, to that fear. So it doesn't remember everything in that chronological order. And sometimes that's why it's bits and pieces, parts that you may remember. And so a lot of people wonder why they have flashbacks or have memories the way that they do, is because this analogy I'm going to tell you about. Imagining that trauma, that traumatic experience, is like a piece of glass, and it shatters into any memory, anything that it wants to. And so, for instance, if you had been sexually assaulted on, silk sheets, and later in life you go to a hotel and they have silk sheets, you're not expecting it, you're not preparing for it, you touch those silk sheets and bam, you're right there in that moment, or you're remembering those things. So those glass shards, they go to and attach to anything that they want to, and that's how those flashbacks and things come up. And so that being something that you can't help, because we can't control where those shards go and when those things are going to come up, but there are things that we can do to manage those. And speaking of management, that's something that you really have to work hard at. You have to have a good plan. At the end of the day, you always have to know yourself, knowing what your triggers are. And so even though it may hurt reliving some of those moments, trying to remember those things, the pieces that your brain remembers about that moment. If it is sheets, if it is a smell, if it's a certain sound that may have been going in the background that you remember from that moment, remembering those and helping to either one, in your personal life, being able to kind of avoid those things, or two, just having a good plan for what you are able to do to bring yourself down from those moments. And that's where grounding comes in. And so remembering that, why do we have those flashbacks? Those are triggers. That's what I was just talking about on the sheets, the fan. remembering that we have to understand those things. We have to get to that nitty gritty so we can come up with a good plan. And it is hard work, it is. And sometimes it would be easier to bury our heads in the sand rather than dealing with these moments and coming up with a plan. But that way, if you're out and about or anywhere, whether you're at home, whether you're out and about in town, you can better manage these things. So, what are some grounding techniques? I've got a list here I'm kind of going to go over, kind of like I did in my last video. And these are things that you kind of have to explore and figure out what works best for you. With grounding, it's fairly simple in the idea, just figuring out what you were comfortable with and what you were able to, in that moment of panic, what you were able to work through. So, one thing that I always talk to people about is how important your breathing is. If you've ever been around someone who is having a panic attack or even like an asthmatic attack, like remembering in that moment, they couldn't necessarily think that well. They couldn't necessarily remember to do all the steps to help themselves and may have required some help. Our brains, whenever we're in panic, one of the first things we tend to do is lose sight of how to breathe. When we're not breathing and we're not bringing in all that oxygen, our brains are oxygen starved and it's not going to think correctly. So remembering to figure out your breathing, to slow that breathing down. There are hundreds of different breathing exercises. How long to hold it in, how long to breathe in, how long to let it out. You figuring out what you like, what you're physically able to do, and going from there. But breathing is a huge start. Another one is get your feet on the ground. First thing, ground yourself. Literally ground yourself. Put your feet on the ground. Remember your breathing. Open your eyes, looking around where you're at, remembering I'm not there, or that was just a bad memory, that here's where I am. Talking to yourself, telling yourself, this is what day it is, this is what year it is, this is who I'm with, I'm okay, and making sure that your brain understands where you're at. Because a lot of this is just working with our brains to kind of, in a way, reprogram. I like to use the analogy of you take like a plant. You're going to plant a little seed and you're going to take care of it, make sure the soil is good, and it's going to sprout up. Well, if you've left it outside, getting sunshine, whatever, and these past few days it's been really cold, freeze warnings, and you've left it outside, it's kind of in shock. So what do? We try to nurture it back to health. It's kind of the same way with our brains, thinking of it in that manner. We have to take care of ourselves. We have to figure out what's going to work for us. And so one thing that can help on the grounding is using the 5 senses. And that's something real easy that you can do in that moment, is thinking of 5 things that you can see around you at that point in time. 5 or 4 things that you can touch, 3 things that you can hear, 2 things that you can smell, and 1 thing that you can taste. If you can do that in that moment, so it's 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and it's see, touch, hear, smell, taste. If you can remember those things, your brain isn't even thinking about, oh, I'm trying to ground myself right now. It's just doing it. You are going to naturally calm down because you're not thinking about the bad thing. You're thinking about all these other things. And when you kind of come back and you're continuing that breathing, you'll see that you've grounded yourself. Listening to things that are around you. If you are having an active flashback and you're hearing what may have been going on, or things that you heard in the background, actually in that moment, when you're telling yourself, I'm not there in that bad moment, I'm here such and such date, listening to what's going on around you, that can also remind you as well where you're at. Also, detrancing. Some people, whenever they are remembering the bad or they're in a flashback and they're in that moment, they might rock, or they might fidget, or they might shake. When you realize that you're doing that, slowly start working yourself down from those things. Slowly bringing yourself back from those. It's always good to do some positive self-talk, where we tend to be really hard on ourselves. Talking to yourself in a good manner. If you're already in a negative spot, remembering the good. Being really aware of yourself at the end of the day is going to be your best bet. Remembering things that might trigger you. But when you remember those triggers, being able to work through those and having a good plan. Having a good plan on what you're going to do in those moments and not letting it, spiral further. fight, flight, freeze, fawn kicks in. There's a lot of things that happen in those moments, and it's about having those good plans. And so in this, you now should understand the difference between flashback and memory, so you are able to actually talk about those and see the differences and work through different plans on both of those. There's a little bit of immediate grounding on what to do. There's better explanation of why we have these moments, what they look like, a better understanding of what's going on in the brain and why it does what it does. And just remembering that if you're having flashbacks and things, that is something that you can work with an advocate, and whether it be coming up with plans to work through those, whether it be offering resources and what's available, the important part is that you take care of yourself, because prolonged flashbacks, that's not good on the body. Sometimes they can get worse over time, whereas they may start out being 1 minute, 2 minutes. They could get longer and longer without help. And that's what we're here for, is helping you come up with plans. And it's hard talking about those things, but you ultimately want to get to a place of healing. And like Sam said in her last video, she talked about different things that you could do in that healing process to cope. So all these things tie together, and she wonderfully highlighted a lot of good things that you can do. And so it's step by step. You can take each of these videos, place them together, and you'll have a decent plan. But remembering at the end of the day, if you need more assistance, we are here. We are able to work with you and come up with a good plan for these things. That's all I've got for today. Happy Monday. I hope everyone has a good day. Thank you for watching our videos. Share them, like them, whatever you need to. And I'll see you next time.